Alright, in today's video we're going over how to outfit your ships for bounty hunting. Now, we are going to go over the two starter packs that I believe will be the most common ships in the game, and that's the Aurora MR and the Mustang Alpha. Both are great ships for bounty hunting. I've used them both, had a lot of fun in them, and they're surprisingly good. Now, the website that we're using to go over all this and kind of demonstrate and show you what you should do in outfitting and stuff, it's called Urkel. I will leave a link in the description to it below, and I'll also leave links to the fully outfitted Aurora MR and the Mustang Alpha in the description below as well, so you can go down there and check that out if you want to play around with the website yourself. Maybe you like cannons instead of repeaters, or mess around and see how much stuff will cost. But anyway, we're going to go over some very specific for those two ships and some kind of more general rules and philosophies when outloading a ship that you can use to carry over to future ships that you may buy or upgrade for bounty hunting, stuff along those lines. So let's jump right into kind of the first upgrade you want to do, especially with the beginner ships, and that is going to be the guns. And the reason why, especially in the beginner ships, you want to do this is because the guns, you only start out with 2 out of 4 guns, so you are missing quite a bit of firepower. So you really want to get the full amount of firepower out of your ship, because that's going to make the biggest difference when it comes to bounty hunting. Before we just go slapping guns on there's something that you should know beforehand, and that is the puck. Now, these pucks are what makes it so that you can gimbal your weapons, and I'll go over what that means. If you do not have your weapons with a puck on it so that you can gimbal it, this is what your aim will look like, and your weapons are just going to shoot directly ahead of you where your ship is pointing. Now, if you do gimbal your weapons, this is what your ship's going to look like. Now, when you use these pucks and you can gimbal your weapons, this is what your aim's going to look like. You see that circle? That's your weapons are going to try to auto aim inside of that circle, so it's a lot more forgiving and you can hit targets a lot easier. Now, before you go around gimbling all your weapons, there's some sacrifices that gimbling your weapons cause you to have. Now, as you can see here on this Gladius, we have size 3 hard points instead of size 1s. And when you have any bigger size hard point than a size 1, if you put a puck on it to gimbal your weapons, you have to step your weapons down a size. And as you can see here, the size 2 weapon has a little bit less damage than the size 3, and so on. So that's something that you have to consider, is if you want to practice with gimbaled weapons and get used to that, if you upgrade your ship to something that has bigger hard points than the starting ships, you are going to sacrifice damage by using the gimbal. So I personally, when I jumped into the game, I decided, hey, I'm not going to use gimbaled. I want to get good at using the fixed ones so that I can get the most damage possible out of my ship, so I don't use the pucks at all. I never did on the Aurora, even though I wouldn't have sacrificed anything to do that. It's just something to consider, and every person has to make their own decision on how they want to do this. But as you can see here, I can put the same weapon on here regardless if there's a puck on there or not to give me gimbaling, which wasn't the case with the Gladius. I had to downsize the gun. Now, a thing to note is the pucks to gimbal your weapons are very cheap, so you will be able to just throw them on there, and then it's a setting that you can turn off so you can have fixed weapons. So both of these starter ships are very good to, hey, throw them on there, you don't lose any DPS, and you can switch between the modes and test them out, see what you like more, and maybe once you get better at flying, you turn it off, something along those lines. But you can definitely put them on there, and it's not going to affect anything for you. So just to let you know, it's not like, hey, I put them on there and I have to be gimbaled all the time. No, you can turn it off and on whenever you want. Alright, now let's go over guns. What guns should you put on your ship? Well, unfortunately right now it's a pretty simple answer, and it's kind of boring. Laser repeaters are the only guns that you should put on your ship. And the reason why that is just because in 95% of situations, laser repeaters are the best weapon. And even in the 5% that they're not the best weapon, they're still pretty close to being the best weapon. So they're the best all-around weapon, and in most cases, they're going to be the best weapon to use. Now, there's 3 different types of laser repeaters that you can use. The CF117 Bulldog, the Attrition 1s, and the NDB 26s. I personally choose the Bulldogs because they are the cheapest, but all of these are pretty much the same. I have heard the NDB 26s do cause frame drops when used, so that's something to be aware of, but I have not tested this out myself, so I can't 100% confirm that, but I have heard that. Anyway, Bulldogs are the cheapest, so that's what I go with personally. But if you're already hanging out in an area that has one of the other ones, they're not that much more expensive, and you can just buy those and throw them on as well. Now, typically on ships, the next thing I like to upgrade after guns would be the quantum drive. However, on the Aurora MR, you come with a pretty good quantum drive. It has enough gas to get you anywhere in the verse, and it's decently quick. Now, the quantum drive I recommend upgrading to is the Atlas. You have a little bit more gas, so it's a little bit more convenient, and it's a little bit faster, but it's not super meaningful. It's kind of up to you what you want to do on this. If you're a little bit tight on cash, you can definitely skip the quantum drive upgrade. On the Aurora, you already have a pretty good one, and then after you do quite a few more bounties, you can come back and buy it. But typically on most ships, the quantum drive is the next thing I upgrade because it's typically such a huge quality of life boost. But like I said, the Aurora has a pretty good one stock, so you can make a decision there whether you want to do it or not. Alright, now let's talk about shields. This is typically about the third thing I upgrade, but it does depend. Like in the case of the Aurora, I'd probably do shields over the quantum drive just because you already have a pretty good one. And there are two types of shields that I like. I like the FR66s and the Palisade shield. The difference between these shields are the module HP, and I have heard that the Palisade shields block more ballistics. I've yet to do extensive testing on it, but I've been flying around with them for a little bit, and it does seem like that is true. However, I cannot 100% confirm that. The FR66s are cheaper, so right now I'd probably recommend the FR66s over the Palisades just because you definitely have the whole HP, and they are still very good shields. And the reason why the module HP matters is because anything with explosive damage or something like that, they can shut off. Like if a missile hits your ship and damages your shield module, if you only have that 125 HP of the Palisade, you could get a shield that's permanently off or knock out both your shields in one go, where with the FR66s, this is just less likely to happen. So there was one patch where it was happening quite a bit, but this most recent patch I haven't noticed it too much. Power plants, this is kind of one that you can probably skip just because you have more than enough power with everything that you're using on the ship already. But like I said, one patch I was having a real rough time with missiles and other weapons damaging my modules, so I ended up going with the JS 300 just because it had a ton of module HP. If you're flying around, and this is the very last thing I would upgrade on your ship, and if you're flying around doing bounties and you're not having any problems with your shields going down or anything like that, then I would just leave it alone, because the only reason why I upgrade this is because I was having a problem with missiles taking out my power plant. And you might have noticed me saying this is the last thing I would upgrade, and that's because I do not touch the coolers. In the current game, they do not do anything besides cool your ship. There's no advantages to upgrading or anything, and as you can see, we have way more than enough cooling with the stock coolers. The only time you need to change that is if your ship's running hotter than your coolers can keep cold. Now, the missiles are kind of a weird thing because they can be useful, but on the Aurora, you have so few missiles, they're not really that useful. And the marksmans for PvE bounties will work just fine. For PvP, you'll want some electromagnetic missiles, but you only have two, and they're going to have enough chaff and flare to flare them off. So that's why I've left the missiles alone, just to keep this cheaper, and you don't really have enough on an Aurora to make a difference. Now, I know you're saying, I've outfitted my ship on this third-party website, but how do I do this in game? Where do I find all these parts? I go to a shop and it doesn't have everything I need. Well, this website is also great because it helps you do that. If you go over to the non-stock item, add non-stock items to cart, you can click add non-stock items to cart, and then you'll see at the top of the screen non-stock items have been added to cart, and then you'll just want to go over and click on the little cart to pull up everything that you've added. Now that we've opened our card up and we can see what's in it, you can see everything that we put in here. The guns, shields, power plant, gimbal pucks, and the quantum drive are all here. It's showing us our price, and if you look at the locations, it does give you a location. Now, as you can see, we're going to have to make 1, 2, 3, 4 different stops to get all these items right now. There's something that you can do to potentially make it so that you can do less stops if you're lucky. And you can click on the shop location and change and pick what locations that you want to go to buy these things. If you have enough money to pick them all up at once, that's great. Or if you only have money to pick up a couple of these items, you can change the location to your closest location currently. If you can only buy like the Bulldog repeaters and you're like, oh, well, I'm in New Babbage, I'll just go buy it there and buy them real quick. Or I'm at Area 18 or Crew L5 is the closest thing to. And as you can see, after we changed everything, we knocked it down to 3 stops. It only saves us 1 stop, but that's still helpful. And depending on what you're buying and what ship you're buying it for, sometimes you can knock it down quite a bit. So it just depends, but that's something to keep in mind if you want to be the most efficient about it. If you're looking at this and you're thinking 92,000, well, you start with 20,000. That's way too expensive. Like I said before, guns are the most important on the Aurora because you're missing half your firepower and you have a pretty good quantum drive, and your shields will get the job done. So if you just want to buy the guns, as you can see, the Bulldog repeaters, like I said before, are the cheapest of all repeaters. It'd be 6,290 credits. If you want to throw in the gimbaled mounts and play around with those too, or you just plan on flying gimbal, your total comes up to 8,186 credits to get out there and start having fun bounty hunting. So you can do it for fairly cheap, and then you can add all these other items on later. Alright, now that we have the Aurora wrapped up, let's jump into the Mustang Alpha. Now, I'm not going to go over and explain gimbaling again because I did that in the Aurora section, so if you missed that, I suggest going out back there and checking it out because there are some kind of unique things to it if you don't know the ins and outs and how it works. But I will say, since your guns are mounted to a nose turret on the Mustang, you do not need the pucks to gimbal it, and again, since it has the size 1 turrets, you can gimbal both of those without any DPS reduction. So again, you can have a fully gimbaled ship without having any loss of DPS. Now, unfortunately, on the Mustang Alpha, it comes with cannons, and like I said before, repeaters are king in the current meta. I would highly recommend swapping out your cannons for repeaters, and you definitely do not want to run cannons and repeaters on the same build because the velocity of the cannon shots is slower than the repeaters, so your pip that you aim at will only pick one, and you're going to miss with half your guns if you do a cannon and repeater setup, so just be aware of that. Now again, you do have 3 different options for repeaters. I go with the Badgers again because they are the cheapest, and the NDB 28s. I have heard that they cause some frame drops when shot, so just be aware of that. But again, the Badgers are the cheapest, so that's what I would go with. Here again, you can see you can add the puck to gimbal your weapons, and then again, I recommend the Bulldogs, the same as the Aurora here. They're the cheapest, and I just do that for both the guns. Have the Badgers in the size 2 slot, and you are good to go. Now, the Quantum Drive on the Mustang isn't quite as good as what it was on the Aurora. It's a little bit faster but has less range, and it means that you won't be able to make all the jumps without a pit stop in between, so that's something. It can make most of them but not all of them, so in some situations like Microtech to ArcCorp, you will have to make a pit stop on the way there. So that is just something to be aware of. It's not a major inconvenience, so you can decide, hey, maybe I should upgrade shields first if I'm having a little bit of trouble with bounties and do the Quantum Drive later. I would personally put a Quantum Drive on here as fast as possible just because it can be a little inconvenient. And the weird thing about this is because once you grab the Atlas Quantum Drive, it's actually a little bit slower, but you get a lot more gas, so it's just a lot more convenient and time saving in the long run if you're not having to make pit stops. So that's just why, if you're wondering why, hey, my Quantum Drive is a little slower after I upgraded it, it's because it's more efficient and you can travel farther and make less pit stops. I don't know why CIG's done it this way, but the shields on the Mustang, which is supposed to be more of a fighter, the stock shields on it are actually worse than the stock shields on the Aurora. It has worse weapons, so I don't know why they've done this. But anyway, again, I would recommend upgrading to the FR66s. For this, they're a little bit cheaper than the other one I would consider, the Palisades, and they got the more module HP in case you get some damage that's hitting your shield modules. You're not going to lose your shields quite as often because your modules will be able to survive hits like that. Now, it hasn't been as much of a problem in this most recent patch as another patch I had this issue in, but I have had my shields knocked out a couple times since I've been flying. It's just not nearly as frequent. Again, the very last thing I would upgrade on here is the power plant, and only if you have your power plant taken out, I would consider upgrading this because it is a decently expensive upgrade, and if you're not having your power plant be taken out by missiles or stuff like that, not noticing any issues where you take a hit and you're like, oh, my power is super low, then I wouldn't recommend upgrading it. But if you do have that issue, you can upgrade your power plant and the module HP will go up by quite a bit, so you will no longer have that issue. It's just something that after you're flying, if you notice your power plant getting knocked out quite a bit, you can go ahead and throw a JS300 on there. Now, there's no missiles on the Mustang Alpha, so there's nothing to do those. And the coolers, like I said before, if you look over on the side, they got plenty of cooling for everything that we're running on here. We are good to go. Don't recommend messing with the coolers, just kind of waste of money at this point in the game. So let's jump right into how much does it cost to upgrade, and where do we get the parts. Well, again, you're going to look on the side here and click non-stock items to cart, and then you'll see a thing at the top, non-stock items have been added to cart, and you can go and click on your cart to see your items. As you can see, the Mustang costs a little bit more than the Aurora to upgrade, and that's just because the Aurora comes with 2 repeaters where the Mustang comes with 2 cannons, so we had to swap those out. So the cost of those 2 guns is what bumped our price up. Anyway, again, you can see that all these are at different places. Again, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 different places that these are at, and if you click on this to pull down the menu, you can change where you are shopping and potentially knock down how many places that you have to go to so you can be more efficient. As you can see here, we knocked down from having to fit visit 4 different places to 3. Like I said, sometimes when you upgrade you can get it down less, sometimes you can get it more. But one thing you can do if you're only upgrading your guns at first, because that's all you want to do, you can go check to see where you're at and where the closest place is and switch it around so you don't have to fly as far. Now the guns are what I would consider a bare minimum upgrade to get into the bounty hunting, and as you can see it's going to run us considerably more than the Aurora, about 10,000 more, and again that's just because the Mustang comes with cannons. Cannons really are only situational use. You can use them for PvE bounty hunting, and some people do like them, but if you're new to the game, it's much easier to hit targets with repeaters and keep your damage on target and keep their shields from recharging with repeaters currently than cannon, so I highly recommend going with cannon. But as you can see, the starting of this is 18,728, which if you didn't use a referral code to get to your account, that's going to be almost 4,000 credits over. That's going to cost more money than what you start with, and if you did use a referral code, this is basically going to clean you out, and you might not even be able to afford to buy gas. So it is a little bit rough. I wish CIG maybe would throw repeaters on the Mustang Alpha, just because it's kind of, you basically need that for bounty hunting at this point, and it would drop the price to get this ready to go for bounty hunting to the same as the Aurora and make it a lot easier for people who have Mustangs to get into bounty hunting, I think. Thank you all for watching the video, and I hope it's helped you out, and if you have any more questions, let me know down in the comments below and I'll try to get to them as quick as I can.